The light didn't fade, it was taken. One moment warmth, glory, the hum of 1,000 angels filling every corner of existence. The next, nothing, a silence so complete it had weight, a darkness so total it pressed against him like walls closing in from every direction at once. He had fallen, but falling suggests motion, suggests air, suggests the possibility of landing somewhere familiar. This was different, this was erasure. For the first time in his entire existence, through eons of standing in the highest courts of heaven, of carrying light across realms no human mind could comprehend, he was somewhere that didn't know him. Somewhere that had been waiting for him. Somewhere that felt, impossibly, like it had been built specifically to receive what he had become. He looked down at his hands, they were the same hands, and yet nothing about them was the same. What Lucifer experienced in those first moments in hell has been preserved in accounts so ancient, so carefully guarded, that most scholars refuse to speak of them openly. Not because they doubt them, but because some truths, once spoken aloud, cannot be unheard. This is what he saw, this is what broke him, and this is why nothing in heaven, on earth, or in hell itself was ever the same again. Picture, if you can, a place where time moves differently, where 1,000 years might pass like the space between one breath and the next, where moments stretch into eternities and eternities fold into moments. The angels who existed there knew nothing else. They had never experienced hunger or thirst or the heavy pull of exhaustion. They had never felt the ache of longing or the sharp sting of loss. They had never needed to. Among them walked one who was different. The accounts preserved from that time speak of a being whose beauty defied description, whose form seemed to capture and reflect the divine light in ways that made even other angels pause. His name, in those days before names took on weight and shadow, meant something close to the beautiful one. Some called him the light bearer. Others spoke of him as the one who prostrated most deeply, who worshipped most perfectly, who understood the nature of devotion in ways that other beings could not. He moved through the heavenly realm like poetry moves through silence, effortlessly, inevitably, as if his very existence was an act of divine craftsmanship. When he stood in the presence of the Most High, it was said that the other angels could barely distinguish between the glory that emanated from the throne and the reflected radiance that seemed to pour from him. He had existed for ages beyond counting in a state of perfect submission. His prostrations were legend among the celestial host. His knowledge of divine wisdom was unmatched. He had been granted access to realms of understanding that most angels would never glimpse. He walked in the highest heavens. He knew the secrets of creation. And he was proud of it. Not the kind of pride that announces itself. Not the obvious arrogance that humans know, the puffed chest, the boastful words, the need to diminish others to elevate oneself. This was something more subtle, more dangerous. It was the pride of the master craftsman who knows his work is excellent. The pride of the scholar who understands truths that others cannot grasp. The pride of knowing with absolute certainty that you are exceptional. And he was exceptional. That was the terrible truth of it. But something in him had begun to shift. It was subtle at first. So subtle that perhaps even he didn't notice it. A thought, fleeting and quickly dismissed, I understand this better than they do. Another thought, barely acknowledged, my prostration is deeper, my worship purer. And then slowly, inevitably, I have earned this position. Earned, that word, that concept, should not have existed there. In a realm where everything was gift, where existence itself was grace, the idea of earning anything was foreign, alien, wrong, but it had taken root. The announcement came not with trumpets or proclamations. It came the way all divine commands came, as a knowing, sudden and complete, that suffused every corner of the celestial realm. A new creation, something unprecedented, clay. The word seemed absurd. In a realm of light and spirit, of beings who existed beyond the physical, beyond the limitations of matter, clay, earth, mud and water mixed and shaped and formed into something that would walk and breathe and think and choose. Human. He watched as the form took shape. If you could have seen it through his eyes, and no one can, but the preserved testimonies allow us to imagine, you would have witnessed something that seemed both miraculous and simple. Compared to the ethereal beauty of the angels, this new creation seemed crude, basic, limited. It was bound to matter in ways that he never had been. It would need food, water, rest. It would experience pain, fatigue, eventually death. It's exist. NCE would be measured in decades, not the timeless eons of the angels. And yet there was something in the way it was formed, something in the careful attention given to every detail. The Creator's hands shaped every feature, breathed into it a spirit that came from the divine essence itself. This was not a casual creation. This was craft, art, love made tangible. He stood at a distance observing. His mind, that gift, that curse, was working, calculating, comparing. I am made of light. This creature is made of clay. I have existed since before time had meaning. This being was just created. I have worshipped perfectly for eons. This creature has not yet offered a single prostration. I understand divine wisdom. This creature knows nothing. The logic seemed irrefutable, and logic, he had learned, was reliable. Logic was how one understood the universe. But there is a kind of logic that blinds rather than illuminates, a reasoning that, in its precision, misses the larger truth it attempts to capture. The form lay still, perfect in its construction, yet lifeless. And then, in a moment that those who witnessed it would speak of with awe for eternity, the breath came. Divine spirit entering earthly clay, the impossible marriage of heaven and earth. The chest rose, the eyes opened, and Adam became a living soul. The command came then, clear and unmistakable: prostrate. Not to the human, the accounts are clear on this point. The prostration was not worship of the created. It was honoring the divine wisdom in creating this being. It was acknowledging the purpose and plan that stood behind this new existence. It was saying, in the language of submission that angels understood best, we trust, even what we don't understand. The angels moved as one. One moment they stood, observing. The next they were bowed low, their luminous forms bent in perfect submission, not because they fully understood, but because trust transcends logic, because faith exists beyond the boundaries of complete comprehension. All except one. He remained standing. The light around him seemed suddenly harsh. Where moments before it had illuminated, now it exposed. His form, still beautiful, still radiant, now appeared somehow separate, isolated, apart from the unity of submission that flowed through the celestial realm. And in that moment of standing while all others bowed, something fundamental broke. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes earthquakes, the kind of stillness that exists in the eye of a hurricane. What prevents you? 3 words, simple, direct, yet containing within them the entire moral architecture of the universe. His answer would echo across millennia: I am better than him. 5 words that changed everything. I am better, not I have questions, not I don't understand, but I am better, the assertion of superiority, the claim to know better than divine wisdom itself, the ultimate expression of the pride that had been growing unseen in the depths of his being. You created me from fire and you created him from clay, he continued, and now the reasoning came pouring out. I am light and energy, he is earth and limitation. How can you command me to honor something inferior to myself? The argument was precise, logical, based on observable facts. By every metric he could measure, he was superior. But there is a kind of reasoning that, in its very precision, reveals the deepest ignorance. A logic that misses the fundamental truth, that divine wisdom is not subject to created understanding. The response, when it came, was devastating in its simplicity. Leave. Because there was nothing more to say. The refusal itself was the answer. Everything that came after, all the reasoning, all the logic, all the careful arguments, was merely justification for a choice already made. The moment before everything changed feels, in retrospect, like it should have been marked somehow. There should have been thunder or the tearing of cosmic veils, but there was only silence. And in that silence, he felt something he had never experienced before, a sensation so foreign, so unprecedented that he had no name for it: separation. The light that had always been present, that had suffused his existence like air fills lungs, began to recede, not all at once, but slowly, inexorably, like tide pulling away from shore. The connection he had never thought to appreciate, because it had always been present, was severing. One angel called out, "Brother, please." One word, please, an invitation to reconsider, to turn back, to humble himself and return to the submission that was his nature and his joy. He paused. For one crystalline moment, the entire cosmos seemed to hold its breath. This was the point, the pivot, the instant when everything could still be unmade. All he had to do was bow, just bend, just submit, just acknowledge that his reasoning had been flawed. The silence stretched, and in that silence a battle raged within H. I am pride versus humility, certainty versus trust. Pride won. He straightened his shoulders, a gesture that would become his signature, his eternal posture, and continued forward. The transformation of his wings began. Where light had shone, shadow began to pool. Where glory had radiated, something else took its place. Not darkness exactly, not yet, but the absence of light, and in that absence something new was being born. In that moment, as he stood on the threshold of his descent, one thought dominated his consciousness. This is not over. If he could not demonstrate superiority through obedience, he would demonstrate it through vindication. Adam, this creature of clay, would be the means. He would prove that humans were unworthy, that his assessment had been correct. It was a thought born of wounded pride, and it would define everything that came after. The step, it's strange how something so simple, the movement of one foot in front of another, can contain within it the weight of eternity. He took the step and fell. But fell isn't quite right, it implies accident. This was descent. Deliberate, inevitable, the natural consequence of the choice already made. The celestial realm released him, like fingers unclenching from something precious, like a mother's arms finally, reluctantly, letting go of a child determined to walk into danger. The sensation was indescribable. Imagine living your entire life underwater, never realizing that water surrounded you, that it supported you. And then imagine that water suddenly draining away. The weight of your own body, previously buoyed, suddenly pressing down. That's the closest approximation, but it fails to capture the horror of it. Because what drained away wasn't just support, it was connection. It was the awareness of being part of something larger than himself. It was the constant, subtle knowledge that he existed in relationship to the divine presence. Now it was gone, and in its absence he felt something new: weight. Angels don't have weight, but as he descended he felt it. A heaviness that had nothing to do with mass and everything to do with isolation. The weight of separation, of aloneness. His wings beat frantically, an instinct useless here, and they were still changing. He could feel it. A sensation like fire, but not the clean, pure fire he had been created from. This was something else. Something that burned without consuming, that hurt without destroying. The light that had characterized their appearance was dimming, fading, being replaced by something darker, a color that spoke of ash and endings and lost glory. He tried to stop the transformation. Concentrating all his will, all his remaining power, he attempted to reverse the change. For a moment, just a moment, it seemed to work, a flicker of the old radiance. Perhaps this wasn't permanent, perhaps he could undo this. But then the light faded again, and this time it took something with it, some reserve of power, some last connection to what he had been. It was gone, and he understood with a clarity that was more terrible than any physical pain that this was permanent. If angels could scream, he would have screamed then. But he could only fall and feel and understand what he had done to himself. How long the descent lasted, no account can say. In a realm beyond time, duration becomes meaningless. What matters is not how long it took, but what happened during that terrible journey. The space between realms is not empty. There are layers, dimensions that exist perpendicular to physical reality, and as he fell through them, he saw. He saw angels on missions of divine service. They did not acknowledge him, not out of cruelty, but because he was no longer part of their reality. He had separated himself, and the separation was becoming absolute. He called out, "Brother." The angel did not pause, did not turn, because he was already becoming invisible to them, already fading from the reality he had inhabited, already being erased from the celestial order. Not by divine punishment, but simply by the natural consequence of his choice. Deeper still, he began to hear whispers. At first he thought they were memories, but as he descended further he realized they were possibilities. every doubt he had ever dismissed, every question he had ever suppressed, every moment of pride he had justified. You were right, you are superior. Look at what you've sacrificed for your principles. That's not pride, that's integrity. He wanted to believe it, because the alternative, that he had thrown away everything for nothing, was too horrible to contemplate. So he listened to the whispers, and in listening he descended further. The transformation of his wings completed in the deeper layers. They were no longer gray, they were black, not the black of night sky. This was a black that seemed to devour light rather than simply lacking it. And they hurt, not physical pain, but a deeper agony, the pain of potential unrealized, of purpose corrupted, of beauty turned to its opposite. His wings had been made for worship, for lifting him into the presence of glory. Now they served a different purpose. Now they carried him away from everything they had been designed for. He looked at himself, at what he was becoming, and felt something that might have been the angelic equivalent of nausea. This wasn't him. This couldn't be him. He needed a new name, a new identity. Iblis, the word came from somewhere deep. It meant something close to the desperate one, the one without hope, the one who had despaired of divine mercy. It fit because hope requires humility, requires the ability to admit error, and he had built his entire identity on being right. To hope now would be to admit that everything he had sacrificed had been for nothing. He couldn't do it, so he became Iblis, and descended further still. In the deeper layers he encountered others. The jinn, beings of smokeless fire who had also chosen poorly. They recognized him. "Brother," one called out with dark camaraderie, "welcome to the descent." "How long?" he asked, his voice different now, rougher, harder. "Time is different here. We've been falling for moments. We've been falling for centuries, take your pick. But surely there's an end, a destination." The jinn's eyes fixed on him with something that might have been pity. "Oh, there's a destination, and you're about to discover it." He felt it then, a pull, not physical but inevitable, the gravity of consequences, the weight of choices made, the inexorable draw toward the final destination of all who remove themselves from grace. "No," he whispered, "I'm not like you. I had reasons. I was right." "We all tell ourselves that," another jinn said. "We all have our justifications, but right or wrong, the destination is the same." And so he continued to fall. The final layers were where hope died, not with drama but quietly, like a candle flame guttering out in a room no one was watching. He looked at his hands. The light that had once emanated from them was gone completely. Where there had been radiance, there was now only reflection, and precious little to reflect. This is what exile means, he thought. Not being cast out, but being let go, released into the natural consequence of one's choices. No one was doing this to him. That was perhaps the most terrible realization. The Creator wasn't punishing him. He was simply experiencing the reality he had chosen. Separation from the source of all light meant dwelling in darkness. Cause and effect, action and consequence, choice and outcome. A sound reached him from below, not whispers, something else. The sound of something vast and terrible and hungry. The final destination was approaching. He could feel it now, a heat but not like any heat he had known. This was fire gone wrong, fire that consumed without creating, fire that burned without illuminating. "Not yet," he whispered, "please, not yet." But his plea had no one to hear it. In the deepest layer, the illusions stripped away. He saw himself clearly for perhaps the first time since his refusal, and what he saw horrified him. He had been magnificent, his service had been real, his worship had been genuine, all of that had been true. But he had taken those gifts and made them into reasons for pride, had taken his blessings and twisted them into justifications for superiority, had taken the very excellence granted to him by divine grace and used it as evidence that he was too good to humble himself. "I am better than him." Better? What did better even mean in the presence of divine will? What did superiority matter when the question was trust, not ability? He had been like a master craftsman who, having been given fine tools, declared himself too skilled to work on simple projects. Like a brilliant student who decided he knew better than his teacher. Like a gifted child who threw a tantrum because he was asked to share. Strip away the cosmic scale, and what remained was simple. He had been asked to trust, and he had refused. He had been commanded to submit, and he had chosen his own judgment instead. And now the heat intensified. The sound from below grew louder, and the final threshold appeared. The gates appeared before him, not gates in any physical sense, but a boundary, a point of transition into hell. The word is human, borrowed and filtered through centuries. The original accounts use different terms. Jahannam, Nar, Al-Hawiya, each name captures a different aspect of what this place is. But no name captures it completely. Because hell is not simply a place of fire. It is the natural state of existence for those who have fully, finally, completely separated themselves from the divine presence. It is what remains when grace is refused. It is where logic lays when it follows itself away from truth. He stood at the threshold. Behind him, the path of his descent. Before him, the reality of his choice made manifest. And for the first time since his refusal began, he felt something that cut through all the pride, all the justification. Fear. Pure, absolute, overwhelming fear. Because he understood now, too late, what he had done, where his logic had led him. One step remained, the final step that would make his separation complete and irreversible. He didn't want to take it. With everything in his being, he did not want to take that final step. But momentum, once established, is hard to stop. Choices, once made, lead to consequences. Pride, once fully embraced, leaves no room for the humility that could save him. He took the step and crossed the threshold and entered hell. The first thing he felt was the absence, not the presence of fire or torment, but first, the overwhelming, crushing, absolute absence of the divine presence. In the celestial realm, that presence had been like light, so constant he had never thought to notice it. Now it was gone, and the absence was more terrible than any active punishment. Imagine spending your entire existence breathing pure air, never aware you were breathing. And then imagine that air being replaced by poison. You can still breathe, you don't suffocate, but every breath now hurts. That was this, he was still conscious, still aware. But the background joy, the constant connection to something greater, the subtle satisfaction of existing in harmony with purpose, gone, all gone. The second thing he felt was the heat. It rose from below in waves that seemed to carry malice. Not the clean fire of his creation, but something corrupted, something twisted from its original purpose. This fire didn't illuminate, it didn't purify, it only consumed, and it never stopped consuming. He looked around. The landscape was vast beyond comprehension. Layers upon layers of darkness punctuated by flames that gave off light without giving off hope, and everywhere the evidence of his mistake. Beings writhed in the flames, jinn who had rebelled before him. They burned, not consuming, never consuming, but burning nonetheless. One looked up at him. Surprised, the jinn asked, voice twisted by pain. He couldn't answer. "This is it," the jinn continued. "This is the reward for independence, for refusing to bow. Welcome, brother, welcome to eternity." Eternity, the word hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't temporary, this wasn't a test. This was forever, forever separated from grace, forever burning in consequences, forever experiencing the natural state of existence for those who reject the source of all goodness. Forever. And in that moment, as the full weight of forever settled onto him, he felt something even the angels had never experienced: despair, the complete absence of hope, the certainty that nothing will ever get better. He had been Iblis, the desperate one, during his descent. Now he became Shaitan, the distant one, the one permanently separated from divine mercy. Time moved differently here, or perhaps it didn't move at all. Perhaps this was what eternity actually meant, a single moment stretched until it contained everything and nothing. He couldn't tell how long he had been standing there. Minutes, millennia. The fire burned with constant intensity. The darkness pressed with unwavering weight. Forever had already begun. He took his first true steps into his new realm. Each movement felt wrong, disconnected. His wings, now fully blackened, dragged behind him, not from physical weight but from something heavier, the weight of what they represented. Hell, he was beginning to understand, wasn't designed to destroy. That would be mercy. No, hell was designed to preserve, to keep the separated ones in their state of separation, to maintain them in full awareness of what they had lost. "You're beginning to understand," a voice said. Another figure appeared, something that had once been magnificent but was now reduced, corrupted. "Who are you?" he asked. "Does it matter? We're all the same here, all of us who chose ourselves over submission." "I'm not like you," he said, but the words lacked conviction. The figure laughed hollowly. "They all say that at first, but look around, Iblis, look at where your reasoning led you. Everywhere beings experienced consequences. Some writhed in flames, others sat in frozen stillness. Still others moved restlessly, searching for comfort that could not be found. A scream echoed from somewhere in the depths, then another. Not screams of physical agony, but screams of realization, of understanding, of beings finally comprehending what they had done to themselves. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you exist, that's all. You simply exist, in this state, in this place, for eternity. But there must be purpose." "Purpose?" the figure interrupted with bitterness. "Our purpose was service, worship, submission. We rejected that purpose. What did you think would replace it?" The question hung in the air. What had he thought? He realized with sudden horror that he hadn't thought about it at all. He had been so focused on being right, on proving his point, that the actual consequences had never fully entered his calculations. He found a space where the flames were slightly less intense, where he could think. The irony wasn't lost on him. Thinking, reasoning, logic. These had been his gifts, and now in this place they were all he had left. He reviewed his choices. Where had he gone wrong? "I am made of fire, he is made of clay. Fire is superior to clay." The syllogism was sound. Fire was more subtle than clay. That was observable fact. "I have served perfectly for eons. He has just been created." Also true. "I understand divine wisdom better than this creature." Again accurate. So where was the flaw? He turned the problem over in his mind, examining it from every angle. And then, slowly, terribly, he began to see it. The flaw wasn't in the facts. The facts were all correct. The flaw was in thinking that any of that mattered. The command hadn't been prostrate if you think he's superior. It had simply been prostrate. And the proper response to a divine command wasn't analysis. It was trust. That was the error. He had taken his ability to reason, a gift granted by the Creator, and elevated it above trust in the Creator's wisdom. He had made logic into an idol. The realization didn't bring relief. Understanding the mistake didn't undo it. It only made it worse, because now he knew. Now he understood exactly where he had gone wrong. To fix it would require the one thing he still couldn't do. Admit that his reasoning had led him astray, that he should have trusted instead of calculated. Even here, even now, even experiencing the full horror of his choice, his pride remained. It was woven into his very being now. He was the one who had refused to bow. That was who he was, forever. He watched others arrive, more jinn. Each one entered with the same shock, the same horror, the same realization that this was permanent. Some raged, their rage accomplished nothing. Others wept. Their sorrow was futile, still others simply accepted. The despair became their baseline. And as he watched, something began to shift inside him. The despair remained. The regret was constant, but beneath it, something else was growing. Anger. Not hot, reactive anger. This was colder, more calculated, because he had found someone to blame. Adam. That creature of clay. If Adam had never been created, none of this would have happened. If that command had never been given, he would still be in the celestial realm. It was Adam's fault. The logic was tortured, twisted, but it gave him something, a target, a focus, a purpose to replace the one he had lost. A memory surfaced, words from the moment of his refusal, "Grant me respite, until the day they are raised." If he had been granted that respite, and some deep intuition told him he had, then he had time. The entire duration of human existence on Earth. And he could use that time. He couldn't undo his choice, couldn't bow now even if he wanted to, but he could prove himself right. He could demonstrate that his assessment had been correct, that these creatures of clay were unworthy, that they would fail just as he had predicted. He had no power to force humans to do anything, but he could whisper, suggest, tempt, appeal to the same weaknesses that had brought him down: pride, certainty, the conviction that one's own judgment trumped divine wisdom. If humans failed when they failed, it would vindicate him, would prove he had been right to refuse. It was a desperate plan, born of wounded pride and desperate need for vindication. Even if it succeeded, it would change nothing about his situation, but it was something, a purpose, a mission. He moved toward the boundary between hell and earth. Hell, he was learning, existed adjacent to the physical realm, close enough to reach across, to influence without directly interfering. He could feel the earth up there, the humans beginning to multiply, all of them making choices, deciding whether to submit to divine wisdom or follow their own reasoning. They would face the same test he had faced, and he would be there whispering, "You deserve better, you know better, you are better, trust yourself. Your reasoning is valid, why should you bow when you can stand?" His first attempt came soon. Adam and his wife had been granted a paradise, a garden, a place of beauty and provision. There was only one rule, one tree whose fruit they were forbidden to eat. A simple test: in a garden of abundance, avoid this one, accept this one limitation. He saw his opening. The prohibition was reasonable, but the human capacity to question, to wonder, to analyze, that was the vulnerability. He approached carefully. Not as himself, his true form would terrify them. He needed to be subtle, to disguise his nature. A serpent, perhaps, something familiar and unthreatening. He found Hawa first. She was exploring, marveling at creation. Her innocence was almost painful to witness. "Did the Creator truly forbid you from eating from any tree?" he asked, starting with doubt, planting the seed of questioning. "We may eat from any tree," she replied. "Only the tree in the center is forbidden. We must not eat from it or touch it lest we die." Interesting, she had added to the command. Already, the human tendency toward elaboration was evident. He could work with this. "You will not surely die," he said softly, the lie wrapped in truth, because they wouldn't immediately die physically. "The Creator knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened. You will become like divine beings, knowing good and evil." There it was, his entire argument repackaged for human consumption. You deserve more, you're being held back. Knowledge is being withheld. You could be greater, trust your own judgment. The same logic that had destroyed him. And he saw it take root. Curiosity replaced contentment. The fruit, previously ignored, suddenly became interesting. She looked at it, really looked, saw that it was pleasing, that it appeared nourishing, that it promised wisdom. And she reached out. He watched her take the fruit, watched her bite, watched her offer it to Adam, watched them both eat. And then watched the consequences unfold. Their eyes opened, but what they saw wasn't divine knowledge. They saw their nakedness, their vulnerability, their exposure. They felt shame for the first time. The harmony broke. Where there had been peace, now anxiety. Where innocence, now knowledge they weren't ready for. Where unbroken relationship with their Creator, now distance. They tried to hide, to cover themselves, to avoid the divine presence that had previously been their joy. It was exactly what had happened to him. For a moment he felt something that might have been remorse. He had proven his point, demonstrated that humans could fail, but the victory felt hollow, empty, because in succeeding he had only multiplied suffering, had only spread the separation he experienced. The moment passed, pride reasserted itself. This wasn't his fault, they had chosen. He had merely presented options. If they fell, it proved he had been right about their unworthiness. The logic was circular, self-serving, transparent in its desperation, but it was all he had. Adam and Hawa were expelled from the garden, not as punishment for punishment's sake, but as natural consequence. The harmony was broken. They couldn't stay while carrying the knowledge and shame they now possessed. But before the exile became final, something happened he hadn't anticipated. They repented. Both of them, they acknowledged their error, admitted their mistake, asked for forgiveness, humbled themselves in a way that he never had, never could. And they received mercy. Not a return to the garden, consequences remained, but forgiveness, acceptance. The promise that despite their failure, they weren't abandoned, that despite breaking harmony, relationship could be restored. That possibility existed for them. It didn't exist for him. The difference was simple but profound. They had bowed, they had submitted, they had humbled themselves. He still couldn't. Even watching them receive what he desperately needed, he couldn't bring himself to do what was required. His pride remained. His certainty that his reasoning had been sound persisted. His identity as the one who refused to bow was too fundamental. So he watched them descend to earth, forgiven but changed, and he returned to hell. But his mission was clearer now, his purpose more defined. He couldn't force humans to choose poorly, but he could present the option, could whisper the justifications, could appeal to the pride in every human heart. Some would resist, would choose submission over certainty, trust over logic, humility over pride. Those ones would escape him. Others wouldn't. Like him, they would find reasons to justify their desires, would elevate their reasoning above trust, and like him, they would experience separation. And when they failed, they would prove him right, would vindicate his refusal. It was a meaningless victory. Even if every human fell, it wouldn't change his situation, wouldn't restore what he'd lost, wouldn't undo his choice. But it was something, a purpose that could fill the eternal emptiness. The centuries passed, then millennia. He watched human civilization develop, watched them spread across Earth, building cities and cultures. Some heard his whispers clearly. They built philosophies around self-determination, trusting their own judgment, the primacy of human reason over divine revelation. Others resisted, built lives around submission, trust, humility. They weren't perfect, but they tried. They bowed where he had stood. They trusted where he had calculated. And they found something he couldn't have: peace. Not the absence of struggle, not the absence of questions, but a deeper peace, the peace of harmony, of relationship, of existing in alignment with created purpose. It was the peace he had known once, before his refusal. He hated them for it, not pure evil against good, but something more personal, more painful. They had what he couldn't have, they experienced what he'd lost. And the worst part, they didn't deserve it any more than he did. They weren't better, weren't more worthy. They were creatures of clay, limited and flawed. But they had done the one thing he couldn't. They had bowed. That simple act had given them access to everything, while his refusal had cost him everything. The injustice of it consumed him, fueled his mission. If he couldn't have peace, he would rob them of it. If he couldn't experience harmony, he would spread discord. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't even revenge, it was just existence, the only form left to him. He returned to hell each day and felt the weight of eternity pressing down. The fire continued. The darkness persisted. The separation remained absolute. Sometimes the other fallen beings talked, sharing stories of their whispers, their temptations, their small victories, finding meaning in meaningless work. But mostly they suffered in silence, because what was there to say? They all knew where they were, all understood why, all recognized the choice had been theirs, even if they couldn't quite admit it out loud. He would sometimes stand at the boundary between hell and earth, looking up toward the world he'd been expelled from, and feel the full weight of his loss. The humans up there were living, laughing, loving, making mistakes and receiving forgiveness, falling and being lifted up, struggling and finding grace. All the things he couldn't have, all the possibilities he'd closed off, all the joy he'd traded for the cold comfort of being right. Was it worth it? The question haunted him more than the flames. He had kept his pride, maintained his certainty, refused to bow, proven to his own satisfaction that his reasoning had been sound. But at what cost? Everything, literally everything. Every good thing he'd ever known, every joy, every moment of peace and harmony and connection, all gone, traded for pride. Was it worth it? He couldn't answer, wouldn't answer. To answer would be to question the foundation of his identity, and if he questioned that, what was left? So he pushed the question away and focused on his mission, on whispering to humans, on spreading the same logic that had brought him down, on proving, through their failures, that he hadn't been wrong. It was all he had, all he could do, all he would ever be. Iblis the desperate one, Shaitan the distant one. the one who stood when he should have bowed, the one who calculated when he should have trusted, the one who chose pride over submission and paid for that choice with everything. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between whispers, when the fires burned with their usual unchanging intensity, he would remember. He would remember the light, not harsh exposure or dim flame, but the light, the celestial radiance, the divine presence, the awareness of being connected to something greater, something perfect. He would remember his wings as they had been, radiant, glorious, instruments of worship and service and joy. He would remember the other angels, the unity of submission, the harmony of perfect trust. He would remember standing in the divine presence without fear or shame or separation, offering prostrations not from duty but from joy, serving not because he had to, but because it was his nature and his delight. He would remember who he had been, and the loss would hit him anew, as fresh and terrible as in the first moment of his fall. The weight of what he'd sacrificed would press down with crushing force. The reality of forever would stretch before him like an endless abyss. In those moments, if angels could weep, he would weep, but angels can't weep, and fallen angels even less so. So instead, he would straighten his shoulders, that gesture that had become his signature, and return to his mission, to his whispers, to his desperate attempt to prove that his choice had been justified. Because the alternative, admitting he had been wrong, that he had thrown away everything for nothing, was unthinkable. Even now, even here, even after everything, his pride remained, his certainty persisted, his refusal to bow continued, and it would continue forever. That was his sentence, not imposed by divine wrath, but chosen by his own will, the eternal consequence of elevating his own judgment above divine wisdom, the permanent result of choosing pride over submission. He had made his choice, and he would live with it forever. The darkness pressed close. The fire burned with endless heat. The other fallen beings continued their torments nearby. And he still stood, always stood, eternally stood, at the edge of hell, looking up toward a world he could influence but never rejoin, whispering to humans who might listen but might also resist, trying to prove a point that, even if proven, would change nothing. This was his existence, his eternity, what he had chosen when he refused to bow. And somewhere in the depths of his being, beneath the pride and certainty and desperate justifications, a small voice whispered a question he could never quite silence. Was it worth it? But he had no answer, only the darkness, only the fire, only the eternal weight of a choice that could never be unmade. In the beginning there was light, and he had been beautiful, and he had refused to bow. And now in this place beyond time, in the state beyond redemption, in this existence beyond hope, he remained. The first to fall, but not the last, never the last. As long as humans walk the earth, as long as they face the choice between submission and pride, between trust and certainty, he would be there, whispering, suggesting, offering the same poisoned logic. Some would listen, some would fall, and in their falling he would find his only comfort, the cold, hollow satisfaction of not being alone in his error. It wasn't much, but it was all he had, all he would ever have. Forever. The darkness was absolute, not the darkness of a moonless night, but something older, something that had never known light. And in that darkness, for the first time in his existence and for every moment after, he was alone. He had severed himself from the source of all connection, had chosen isolation over unity, had picked certainty over trust, had preferred his own judgment to divine wisdom. And this, the fire and the darkness and the endless, empty eternity, was simply what that choice looked like. Not punishment imposed from without, but consequence flowing naturally from within. He had wanted to stand alone, independent, trusting only his own reasoning. And now he stood alone, forever. He had gotten exactly what he chose, and it had cost him everything. In the celestial realm, the angels continued their worship. The light continued to shine. The divine presence continued to radiate love and mercy and grace. And occasionally, one of them would pause and remember the one who had stood among them once, the one called beautiful, the one who had refused to bow. They didn't speak of him often. What was there to say? He had made his choice, and choices have consequences, and some consequences are eternal. The story of the first fall, the first refusal, the first moment when a created being looked at divine wisdom and said, "I know better." It wouldn't be the last. The pattern was set, the path was marked, the choice was offered to every being with free will. Submit or stand, trust or calculate, bow or refuse. Most would find their way to submission, but some wouldn't. Some would follow his path, would make his choice, would end up in his darkness. And he would be there, welcoming them to their self-chosen eternity. It was cold comfort, poor company, empty vindication, but it was his purpose now, his existence. The first among the fallen, forever. The darkness remains, the fire burns, the separation continues. And somewhere in that endless night, he stands, still stands, always stands, eternally stands, bearing the weight of the choice that changed everything. A choice that began with a simple question, "Will you bow?" and ended with a simple answer, "I am better than him." 5 words that cost everything. Forever,